catch today and go far away. And here comes infinity, takes hold on me into the blue. I've said it 1,000 times. Oh, I paid the price. Let's walk into the setting sun. It's a loaded gun, and they'll be there for us. Those crosses on the island of decay. Crucified. Crucified. mutilation. Hush, burn bodies to the pit. Violation, mutilation. Hush, burn bodies to the pit. Hush, burn bodies to the pit. Burn bodies to the pit. Hush, burn bodies to the pit. give them birth to the children of darkness, invited by us, the children of darkness. Oh yeah! Undone mind, but your light show the sun. Undone mind, it's last alive. Undone mind, undone mind, don't leave you behind.
you will be dead to man, but you will be alive in death.
So I'm here with Mr. Professor Mark Crispin Miller, and he's visiting us from the States, having given a lecture in Harpa in Reykjavik on Saturday. It's been now a few days since. And you have been traveling around the country. And I would just to start this off, Mr. Miller, would you perhaps tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm here to talk about propaganda and sort of introduce that subject to the Icelandic people within the context of the whole COVID crisis. And I guess I should note that I never took any courses in communications. I never took any courses in media. My background is in English literature. I got my doctorate at Johns Hopkins in the 70s, and my field was the English Renaissance. So I was concerned primarily with Shakespeare. I wrote a dissertation on Shakespeare and Castiglione, the Italian author. And at the same time that I was doing that graduate work, I was pursuing my own personal interest in the media through film studies. What I loved about literary study, and still do, is the experience of digging deep into a great text, a great literary text, to discover new layers of meaning, new complexities, to enrich the experience of reading that text. And then, again, on my own, I developed a certain expertise in film study. I taught film courses to the undergraduates at Hopkins. I ran the film series on campus. I wrote essays on film. I never took a course on film. This was all self-taught. But the point to make here, and this relates to the study of propaganda, as I'll make clear, is that one could apply the same kind of close scrutiny to movies that one had been applying to literary texts. And indeed, you can discover that a Hollywood movie that you might think is just a brainless entertainment is actually a great work of art if you watch it a second and a third and a fourth time and look very, very carefully at what's in front of your eyes and not just listen to the dialogue. Well, this led me inevitably to start critical examination of a form of propaganda, which is advertising, TV commercials, and so on. And my first book, which is called Boxed In, The Culture of TV, is a collection of the essays I wrote on media and other subjects in the 70s and 80s. And this led me to kind of drift away from formal literary study and focus ever more directly on the media and politics, the use of the media, so that I was, in essence, studying propaganda full-time, entirely on my own. So I guess that pursuit was based to some extent on a certain inclination I have to question official narratives. For example, in 1991, we had the first Gulf War, right, which was like a 6-week war that had been prefaced by months and months of sort of terroristic exaggeration of the capabilities of the Iraqi army. 4th biggest army in the world, right? We all heard this repeatedly. So, very sturdy propaganda meme. We were made to believe that this war on Iraq was going to be a disastrous replay of our experience in Vietnam. Everybody was terrorized. Then the war ended as if magically in 6 weeks. And indeed, on the first night, we got nothing but impossibly good news on every front. It was just a cakewalk, and we had destroyed Saddam's Air Force, and we had wiped out all his Scud missiles, and on and on and on. So everybody was jubilant and suddenly worshipped George Bush Sr. Well, okay, in short, what this was a propaganda masterpiece. A deliberate exaggeration of the danger for months and months. The illusion that it might There might be a diplomatic breakthrough at the last minute, but that was never planned. So after the fact, I looked into some of the claims that they'd been making, and I wrote a couple of opinion pieces for the New York Times. This is after the war. One revealing that even though day after day after day, at the military briefings, we were told, the TV audience was told via CNN, that we were continuing to destroy all of Iraq's hardware, etc. Every day there would be a new number of Scud missiles that we'd attacked. And today we destroyed another 11 Scud missiles. The next day, today we destroyed another 7 Scud missiles. So at the end of the war, looking back on it, I added up all the Scud missiles we claimed to have destroyed and found that the number exceeded the number of Scud missiles that Iraq possessed. So this was not possible. Then I found a source, an inside source, Scott Ritter, who went on to become a very well-known critic of U.S. foreign policy. And he revealed to me that we didn't destroy a single Scud missile. So every single one of those claims was false, was a lie, in furtherance of this heroic exaggeration of how well we were doing in this war against a far weaker foe. The reality was rather sordid, but the propaganda made it all seem quite noble and gratifying and so on. Then I did another opinion piece for the Times on the fact that on the first night of the war, when we were all told that every American pilot had returned safely from his initial mission, that one of them, a pilot named Scott Spiker, had actually been shot down and killed by an Iraqi MiG. Well, this would never do. They couldn't possibly admit that, because that's the loss of a human life. And at the hands of an Iraqi pilot flying a Soviet-made plane, see? So I told that story. Anyway, the point is that I have a history of critically examining official narratives. I've been doing it for decades, but it wasn't until 2005 that I came to discover how risky it can be to do this kind of thing.
That is when you go against the narrative.
Well, yes, I know now, as I did not know in my relative youth, that it is extremely dangerous to question the official narrative. You look at the plight of Julian Assange, for example. That makes crystal clear that you question official narratives, and more importantly, impel others to question official narratives. You do that at your peril, okay? Because there's a tremendous amount invested in these narratives. The people behind them really mean business. If someone comes along and demonstrates that the narrative is false or only half true, you are going to be targeted, right? Now, let me tell the story of how I came to discover this very poignantly. I've always been concerned about the preservation of democracy. In the 90s, I spent several years trying to get people to see the danger in the accelerating corporate concentration of the media. Mm-hmm. As ever fewer multinational corporations tightened their grip on ever more of the content we were all taking in, right? This is something that started up in the 60s and it accelerated in the 80s and then again in the 90s. So that today, 5 multinational corporations are responsible for like 90% of what we see, hear, and read, which is a disastrous development. Mm-hmm. And I threw myself into trying to publicize that danger, right? I obviously didn't succeed because it continued. Then, early in the century, I became even more alarmed by the absolute corruption of the American voting system. I discovered to my astonishment and horror that, we were using computerized voting and using computers to count votes, that we were not hand counting paper ballots in the open so that representatives of all parties could watch the process. We were not doing that. We were doing something far less secure and far less democratic. So I started working on that problem, studying that problem. And in 2005, having done an exhaustive analysis of the 2004 presidential election, I wrote a book called Fooled Again, which demonstrates that Bush-Cheney were not really reelected in 2004 because that election was stolen. And the evidence is overwhelming. It's impossible to say they were reelected, moreover, because they weren't elected in the first place. The election in 2000 had also been stolen. But this was something that the media quietly admitted because the Supreme Court had shockingly interfered in the vote count in the 2000 election by halting the vote count in South Florida, right, which Al Gore was going to win. So that was a nakedly partisan step by our highest court, and people saw that, and so the press couldn't exactly deny it. The 2004 election was stolen in more various and inventive ways, involving computerized election fraud and all kinds of disenfranchisement prior to Election Day, and I wrote a whole book about it.
So you studied that, you have proof that was the fact.
Yeah. It's definitely true. I was very proud of this book, and more importantly, very optimistic about the likelihood that it would jumpstart a national debate on the urgent need for radical reform of the voting system in the United States. The people of Iceland, I'm sure, don't know this, that the American voting system is the worst in the developed world. Every few years, researchers at Harvard and the University of Sydney collaborate on an assessment of voting systems worldwide. And they have found that the United States is 26th out of 26. That's how bad our election system is. So I thought if I can, demonstrate convincingly that this election was stolen, it'll make a big difference. It'll save democracy. I had all these grandiose expectations, right? Mm-hmm. I had a big publisher, Basic Books. They were very excited. We were all excited. What happened, however, was that the corporate media blacked the book out completely. And again, I'm someone who had written opinion pieces for the New York Times. I was often on national public radio. So even though I was regarded as a kind of edgy type, I was a little bit out there, I was still allowed into the polite society of the liberal media, okay? Mm-hmm.
They considered you to be one of them.
Yeah, grudgingly, but they did. They considered me to be one of them. Maybe I should say uneasily. They were uneasy about me, but they, the work was good, so they, they published it. And they interviewed me on subjects pertaining to mass culture and the media on, as I say, national public radio.
So were you considered to be radical, or?
Yeah, radical, but not to be exiled, right?
Radical on the left.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. I had always identified as being on the left. That's correct. Mm-hmm. We can talk about the left a little bit later, or what we call the left. So the book came out, and there were almost no reviews. There were 2 newspaper reviews in the whole country, minor newspapers, and one was an attack piece. And NPR would not allow me to come on and talk about the book. They were really clearly dead set against its happening. But while that blackout went on throughout the corporate media, this was the strangest thing. The left press, for which I had been writing for decades, attacked the book as conspiracy theory and called me a conspiracy theorist, okay? This had not happened to me before. It's happened to me plenty since. And indeed, that slander has resonated here in Iceland prior to my arrival and after, and I'll talk about that because it helps us understand something about propaganda. So here I was called a conspiracy theorist, and I was staggered by this. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that my community had taken these sort of ignorant shots at this book on an extremely important subject. I mean, I was already a little bit baffled by the fact that the Democratic Party didn't want to talk about election theft, and they're the ones who had been cheated, it seemed to me. And I should add that John Kerry himself, whose victory in 2004 was stolen, told me to my face at a fundraiser that he believed the election was stolen. I think he didn't realize that I had access to the media. He thought I was just this crank who'd written a book, So a lot about this whole episode was really very strange, and not the least was the fact that the entire left was sort of hostile to this attempt to look critically at an election that the left had lost, okay? Well, what I did after I calmed down over this attack was to do a little research into where this phrase or these phrases came from. I was asking myself, when did this become a thing that you're a conspiracy theorist if you examine some incident or some apparent plot? It didn't take long to figure it out. Prior to 1967, I learned, American journalists used the phrase conspiracy theory now and then, but in no consistent way. And they never used the phrase conspiracy theorist. I've not found a single instance of that epithet being used by journalists. I made this discovery just by doing searches on those phrases in the archives in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Time Magazine, online archives. It didn't take very long. It was easy. It then took a little more time to discover why it happened in 1967. And the reason for that is that year, early that year, the CIA, troubled by the fact that a number of books had come out questioning the Warren Report, that is, the official story of how President Kennedy was assassinated. The Warren Commission came out with this whole scenario that Lee Harvey Oswald had done it all by himself. The Warren Report is kind of a joke. I mean, it's ridiculous if you actually read its argument and its alleged evidence. It's laughable, actually. And a few intrepid investigators had made this discovery and had written books, especially Mark Lane, a lawyer who wrote a book called Rush to Judgment, which became a bestseller. So these authors were traveling around the country, raising crucial questions about the Warren Report, demonstrating very clearly that it's completely untenable, not proposing any counter-narrative, just saying the official story is absurd, which I think is the first thing that students of propaganda have to do, is examine official narratives to see if they stand up on their own, before you jump to the conclusion that this or that was an inside job, etc. Okay? So, the memo urged all of the CIA's station chiefs all over the world, and I'm sure in Iceland as well, to use their political connections and their media assets to discredit the work of these conspiracy theorists. And the memo recommends certain talking points to be used in these smear pieces, you see.
Okay, so this was addressed to the station chiefs. Which stations then, you mean?
Globally, all over the world. Every station chief worldwide got a copy of the memo. The memo is...
Referring to the military then, or to the media? Station chiefs?
These are CIA station chiefs.
Okay.
So these are the CIA's top people in different locales. Okay, in every capital in the world.
Okay.
And of course, CIA people are very connected with the media and with politicians, so they're in an excellent position to drive a kind of smear campaign, which is what the memo was calling for. Mm-hmm. If anyone watching this is interested, the memo is 1035-960. That's the identifying number of the memo. You can read it. It basically recommends treating conspiracy theory as ridiculous, as a joke, as a sign of lunacy. We think of tinfoil hats and crackpot views and the Flat Earth Society and stuff like that. That whole approach to dissident takes on the prevailing propaganda narratives begins formally with that memo in 1967. From that moment on, anyone who raises any questions about the official narratives around any significant event is more than likely to be dismissed with a derisive snort and a roll of the eyes as a crackpot.
Okay, so rather than engage in a discussion or a debate, they are discredited.
Indeed, the whole purpose of this attack is to make sure that nobody engages with your argument. You see, it would be one thing if they pumped out counter arguments, if they came up with stronger evidence, right, to bolster their claims. That would be one thing. That would be a debate. That would be a kind of democratic exercise. That's not what they want, okay? They do not want to engage your arguments because they can't engage your arguments.
So, and when you talk about them, you mean?
Well, I mean, in this case, the CIA and its affiliated media, right?
Okay.
Because the CIA has been deeply involved with the American and global media since its founding, really. So they are very skilled at figuring out how to discourage people from listening, how to get people to avoid even considering what it is you have to say. See, so when you are slandered as a conspiracy theorist, this is the authorities conveying the notion that you are not to be heard. You're not to be read. You're crazy, right? And what you're proposing is self-evidently crazy. And the reason why this is so effective, the reason why this has appealed for decades and decades, is that effective propaganda always tells you what you want to hear, okay? It tells you what you want to hear. If propaganda is crafted in a way that's meant to persuade you of something you don't want to believe, it's a failure. It's not going to work. Let's say something about the word propaganda, the word itself, which was coined by the Vatican in the early 17th century. They were feeling extremely threatened by the Counter-Reformation, the evolution of all these Protestant sects, the availability of scripture in vernacular languages. This was a big problem for them. And I think it was a sincere concern on their part. I mean, their power was threatened, but they also believed deeply in what they were doing and in the truth of their gospel. So they saw it as a kind of spiritual obligation to fight back against this. To that end, they formed the Office for the Propagation of the Faith, okay? That office is still in existence today. It's called in shorthand the propaganda. The previous pope had been head of the propaganda, So under the auspices of that office, priests were prepared to do missionary work in the New World, to save as many souls as possible, go among the indigenous people and save their souls by conveying the true gospel to them and saving them from hellfire, an eternity in hellfire because they'd fallen for some horrible heretical Protestant splinter theology. You see what I mean? But the point here is that the word was not in any sense suggestive of deception. We see the word propaganda, we use the word propaganda as a synonym for lying, okay? Which is a legacy of the First World War. But when the word first emerged from the Vatican, it actually denoted the truth. I mean, the absolute truth. So there's no sense in which it was meant to manipulate people's minds or anything like that. And the word comes from the Latin verb propagare, okay, which is a horticultural term, which refers to making a plant grow by grafting a shoot onto a rooted plant. So that's a very useful fact because it dramatizes the necessity of planting propaganda in fertile soil. You see, it won't sprout, it won't grow if it's not planted in receptive soil. So you have to figure out how to tell people what they want to hear. Now, somebody comes along and says, there's copious evidence that the government killed the President of the United States in broad daylight. It involved all the top government agencies. Or someone comes along and says, there's no evidence supporting the claim that 19 Saudi hijackers, all on their own with box cutters, commandeered these planes and flew them into the Twin Towers. All the evidence tells us it was some kind of an inside job. Those are just examples. Who wants to believe either of those stories? What sane person wants to think that their democratic government would commit these high crimes? Nobody wants to think.
I wouldn't want to believe it, but just a small discourse which connects to what you're talking about is that we went through the Reformation and the Enlightenment. There was a lot of struggle where people were fighting to have like the scriptures in the vernacular, like you say, wanted to read the source themselves,
right,
were prevented by the church, I suppose, and by the priests that had been chosen by the church, who were sort of going to tell people what the actual truth was and preventing people from reading the source itself, right?
Right.
So that was part of the whole, like this Reformation business.
Right.
And then today, believing that we live in a secular society, we see echoes of the same happening again, I suppose. If people want to seek the truth, look at the original sources, they are met with modern day priests who tell them that they only are the only ones that know the truth.
That's
and
right.
that truth should not be sought on an individual basis, right?
That's absolutely right. We're living under the conditions of a new Inquisition.
Yes.
It's an Inquisition slavishly, abjectly devoted to science with a capital S.
Yeah, so science is morphing into religion.
Science, it has morphed into religion. It has its high priesthood. And if you question its priesthood, you deserve hellfire for all time.
The only problem is that science contains no rules regarding anything that has to do with mercy or grace or forgiveness or anything like that. It's just, quite harsh if you are caught in its teeth, I suppose. And that has been your experience.
Well, it has. I mean, science depends on argument.
Yes.
Every serious scientist who publishes a new study expects, and I think in most cases wants to be challenged, so that all his colleagues in the scientific universe will test that thesis and try to shoot it down. It's only once those efforts have all failed that universal community will acknowledge that there is something to this new study. It depends on contradiction. It depends on argument. It doesn't have to be hostile, but the method of science requires that kind of willingness to subject your theory to the toughest possible scrutiny, right?
Yes.
You can't have science. Some have actually said we don't have science now. We have dogma, We have claims that suit certain very powerful interests. We have claims that suit Big Pharma. We have claims that suit Bill Gates and his whole operation. It's all about the money and more, But this inquisitorial impulse is death to science, just as it is death to democracy. You cannot have a functioning democracy without free speech and academic freedom. And under propaganda, right? You can't have that at all. And you can't have the rule of law either, right? Because you know who's guilty already. You're guilty if you have contradicted the official narrative, and it doesn't have to be proven.
No, there's no benefit of the doubt.
No.
And people are not innocent until proven guilty.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And
so it's a very primitive system again. We are sort of the basis of our democratic societies are sort of being undermined just in broad daylight.
Yes, that's absolutely true. I have discovered over these last 2 years, and I'm not the only one, that humankind has actually not progressed at all since forever. I mean, I used to be like every other educated person, just presumed that we are not like those who were burning witches in the 16th century. We're not like them because we're not. Well, I think we are. When I look at the ferocity with which anti-maskers were attacked, the ferocity with which anti-vaxxers are attacked, whether they're anti-vaxxer or not, they may just not want to take this particular injection, which isn't really a vaccine at all. The loathing, the hatred with which those outsiders are treated. I mean, several observers have already noted that it clearly echoes the way that the Nazi propaganda cast the Jews, right? Because the Holocaust was a public health measure. People who haven't sufficiently studied that episode don't realize that it wasn't just this explosion of feral race hatred like a Russian pogrom. It was a systematic, highly organized, rationalized public health measure, because the Jews were systematically defined as vectors of fatal disease, primarily typhus, but also tuberculosis and syphilis, and other sexual diseases. This is all over Mein Kampf, it's quite explicit, and the Holocaust was carried out at every level with the full participation of the entire German medical community. There were almost no exceptions to this. But from the time they started sealing Jews off in ghettos to the time that they were, shipping them east to be exterminated and their bodies burned, it was understood to be a ruthless and perhaps in some sense regrettable but necessary effort to protect the health of the German people and specifically the racial hygiene of the German people. See, there was this notion of race health that came out of the eugenics movement. But we don't have to stop at the 30s. We can go all the way back to the Middle Ages. We can go all the way back to any period in human history when delusion prevailed. And we can see that we're just as susceptible to delusion as anybody in our prior human history has been. There's been no progress whatsoever. And this is why, being a fundamentally optimistic person, I have been devoting myself to the notion that propaganda must be studied critically and must be taught. Okay.
So we have to be able to see and to know propaganda when it appears.
Yes.
Right. So I saw this quote by Aldous Huxley the other day. He said something along the lines that the main aim of the propagandist is to convince one section of the society that a certain other section of society is not human, or sort of dehumanize them. And you mentioned the 30s, you mentioned other periods in time. And what we actually saw here in Iceland was quite blatant. We saw editors of newspapers calling for those who had not been vaccinated with this, what shall we call it? This Serum, okay, let's call it that. Those who had not taken the injection should, in one way or another, should not enjoy the same rights as others. You had people here from the industry saying basically the same things. They should be lower class than others. So you could see just basically the same. They're playing the same tune as we have been playing as a race, a human race, in centuries. Previous centuries.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But they won't recognize the similarities.
Well, no, of course they won't. They can't afford to recognize the similarities. What's that?
Take your hand.
Oh, they can't afford to recognize similarities, not least because they purport to be speaking in the spirit of science.
Yeah.
But there's nothing even remotely scientific about this notion that the unvaccinated pose a threat to the vaccinated. I mean, I'm old enough to remember, as almost everybody is, the day when, if you were vaccinated, you were serene, you were calm because you felt you had been immunized against the disease in question, right? I'm not worried, I'm vaccinated. Where did that go? Now, if you're not vaccinated, those who have been vaccinated might get sick from being near you. Well, weren't they vaccinated?
Right.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
On its face, it's just stupid.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with science at all.
Nothing to do with logic even.
Well, no, exactly.
So it's all what? Emotion?
It's emotion.
So is that like a huge part of propaganda, as you say, would be emotion rather than logic? Or
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It tends to promote a body of superstition, which is driven by fear and anger.
Okay.
And this relates to the quote of Huxley's that you just
Yes.
noted. I mean, there is an important genre of propaganda that does indeed engage in the systematic demonization of other groups of people, right? Makes them scapegoats for everything that you fear and hate. But it is fear and anger that makes propaganda effective at its most catastrophic, because you're not using your mind, you're not thinking at all. Right? You're not basing your views on anything scientific. You're simply basing them on what you've heard from the men in the white coats, the authorities, the priesthood. So we have witnessed worldwide under COVID a complete abandonment of all proper democratic procedure.
Yeah.
There's no constitutional protection. There's no proper legislation. Countries are ruled by bureaucratic decree, which is as undemocratic as you can imagine, right? We have no free speech. We have no freedom of assembly.
Right.
We are not, can't even have jury trials. I mean, these things are all in the American Constitution. Right?
Yeah, it's the same here. I mean, power was basically given over to these health mandarins that all of a sudden were controlling governing the country without the politicians, the elected politicians, taking the decisions. They were taking them formally, on paper, but they're obviously not taking them. You understand?
Yeah.
So the government was effectively moved elsewhere. The parliament was like disengaged. So a lot of things happened. There should have been a major concern, but for some reason it wasn't.
No, it wasn't. Well, I think that the reason, here I'm going to engage in conspiracy theory, I think that the reason why democratic governments has been jettisoned in country after country after country is in furtherance of a global order. It's the Great Reset, which, like Justin Trudeau, for example, has smirkingly called a conspiracy theory, despite the fact that there is a book called The Great Reset by Klaus Schwab, and his French co-author. And there was a whole special issue of Time magazine called The Great Reset. I mean, it is a real thing. And even as we sit here speaking, right, we're just a few days away from a major treaty vote, which would give the World Health Organization absolute ultimate authority on all health-related matters, authority that will basically obviate any kind of national sovereignty. This is a disastrous development, and not enough people even know it's happening.
But do you know Paulo Coelho? He's a Brazilian writer.
Yeah, I know the name.
Yeah, so he wrote this book called The Alchemist. And in one section of the book, the main story, the hero is traveling from A to B, and they are hiding something, and they are wondering, how can we hide it? And their conclusion is, it's best that we just leave it in plain sight, and then no one will see it. And so I read this book that you mentioned, and they say basically it says quite early on, the COVID-19 pandemic gives us a great opportunity to reestablish and restart the whole, like the economic, the political, and the environmental governance of the world. You know what the solution is in the book. I mean, it says plainly in the book, the whole solution is big government.
Right.
It's big government. So it's not national elected governments.
Right.
It's big government controlled by some unelected specialists who work for international organizations. So if you mention this to someone, even though it says it plainly in the book, you would perhaps be branded a conspiracy theorist.
Because nobody wants to believe that.
Why not?
Same thing. Because again, propaganda resonates by telling you, what you want to hear. Nobody wants to hear that that's true because it's very bad news. Nobody wants to hear that the world they have always known is just as definitely doomed as the world of the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere. We're doomed by the conquistadors. I mean, being an optimist, I like to think it will not happen because people will wake up and turn against it, right? But it's precisely to prevent that from happening that people like us are slandered and ridiculed and caricatured as cranks, as crackpots. And a very good example of that comes from just this week. The health freedom community has hosted me here, and I'm extremely grateful that you have, because it's been a wonderful experience, and it is very promising. To be in a country like this, where there is a tremendous potential for waking people up. Well, the masters of the propaganda want that less than they want anything. They haven't done all they've done so that some loudmouths can show up and start telling people what people need to know, telling people things that will impel them to think twice about what they've heard, and maybe change their behavior and adopt a more resistant stance towards what's going down. They don't want that to happen. So what do? They simply take out, dust off the conspiracy theory playbook, and they find ways to associate you with arguments that you can reasonably assume most people will find repellent. See? And that's what happened here in the media, the Icelandic media.
So I just wanted, since you have been here, we saw that there was like a hit piece in one of the Icelandic media, right, where they basically were sounding off on what had been written in on Wikipedia.
Yes.
So I don't know how trustworthy Wikipedia is these days, but basically this hit piece in the Icelandic media was all describing you as you were some sort of a monster, I suppose. And I would be interested to know just the background, or what actually makes one, shall we say, vulnerable against these sort of attacks. Yeah. And smear campaign, if that's what it is.
Oh, it certainly is a smear campaign that we're talking about here. And all one need do in order to incur that kind of attack is to question the official narrative in an audible and compelling way. If you make a powerful point. If, for example, you're talking about 9/11, you mention the fact that Building 7, at the end of the day, a building that had not been struck by any aircraft, suddenly collapsed into its own footprint. And the government has tried to argue that it was the result of 2 office fires. This is a steel-framed structure, enormous, extremely powerful and sturdy. And it just suddenly melted into its own footprint. It was clearly a controlled demolition. Clearly. If you watched videos that were slowed down, it was unmistakable, that explosions were going off on different floors. If you were to point that out in some forum with a large audience, and you put the point very, very, powerfully and clearly, you're going to be listed as someone who needs to be taken down, right? I'll give you an example that precedes my experience here in Iceland, then I will explain the context for the piece that ran in this newspaper. When I was promoting my book on the theft of the 2004 election. I was traveling city to city, speaking in bookstores, and doing a lot of local media. I believe it was in San Francisco where I was being interviewed on the radio. It was a call-in show, so people could call and ask questions. And some guy called out of the blue and sounded completely disgusted and said I didn't know what I was talking about. And anyway, I had written a prior book, he said to the radio audience, arguing that 9/11 was an inside job. Well, I had never written a word on 9/11. You know, when 9/11 happened, I was already concerned about election theft and really thought about nothing else. Didn't have the bandwidth to take on a whole different scandal. I mean, I wasn't a believer or a non-believer. I just didn't give it any thought. But this guy called up and told this bald-faced lie about my having written a book, making a claim that he knew many people listening would think, well, that's crazy. 9/11, an inside job. He thinks that? Well, clearly what he has to say about the election is more of the same. It's lunacy, right? Now, let's talk about the piece that ran in Iceland before my arrival. About a year ago or so, more, having been extremely outspoken in my skepticism toward the official COVID narrative, someone went in and rewrote my Wikipedia page, which was already fairly negative, but now it was more negative, right? Now it was more strident and more defamatory, you know. Wikipedia is not trustworthy. It is when it comes to fairly safe academic subjects. There's a lot of good entries, on Wikipedia. But if you're dealing with anything controversial, if you're dealing with critics of the CIA or dissident scientists or people like me, you've got to be extremely careful and take what you read on Wikipedia with many grains of salt, because it is really a propaganda weapon, precisely because it has the reputation of being a completely legitimate, impartial, objective, scholarly forum, which it isn't really. But it has that reputation, see? Mm-hmm. And that makes it an extremely effective propaganda medium, right? Well, there was that Wikipedia revision. Then in 2021, a former colleague of mine at NYU who had been denied tenure and left, turned up out of the blue and said he wanted to write a profile of my career. He was interested in the trajectory of my career. For a piece he wanted to write for the Chronicle of Higher Education, which is sort of like the New York Times for academics in the United States. I was a little suspicious of his suddenly emerging like this, and I told him that I would agree to the interview if he would allow me to share the videos of our 2 Zoom conversations and our entire email back and forth, because I knew that this might well be a hit piece. And if it were to be a hit piece, as a media studies professor and a propaganda expert, that is to say, an expert on the study of propaganda, not in the practice of propaganda, I thought it could be quite valuable for people to read this attack on me and then go back to the raw material, watch our conversations, read our email exchange, and then they can see how a hit piece is constructed. How do you carve a hit piece out of a mass of innocuous material? So he grudgingly agreed to that, and that material is all up on my website. I urge people to read the attack piece. It's called The Professor of Paranoia in the Chronicle Review. And then I urge them, if they're interested, to watch the conversations, to read the emails, and see how he was intent on depicting me in a particular way. What he did was he plucked a few things from my website, including one article. The website is where I post the material that I send out every day to my listserv, which is called News from Underground. If people go to markcrispinmiller.com and sign up for that listserv, they will receive from me daily emails that provide news that's either been blacked out, important news, that's either been blacked out or misreported, right? So one of the things I shared, you'll appreciate this as a lawyer, there's the Sandy Hook shooting in 2012, right? High profile, horrible story, all these little children killed by a mad gunman, etc. Well, there's a book about the Sandy Hook episode, a book of essays. The book is called, and it's a provocative title, Nobody Died at Sandy Hook. And the contributors to the volume each of them examines an aspect of the official narrative to demonstrate that it was false, that it didn't happen. There are all these different elements within that narrative that turn out to be fabrications and invented. The editor of the book makes the argument that nobody was killed at Sandy Hook. I don't know if that's true or not, since I was not there, but I do know that the book is convincing and that people who are concerned about it should at least read the book and see what they think. Okay. Now, this guy, his name is James Fetzer, a conspiracy theorist, came under really heavy attack. He was hit with, I believe, 2 defamation lawsuits filed by the parents of the children, or the alleged children, I don't know which, suing him for far more than he'll ever be worth, right? And Lenny Posner is the name of the man who purports to be the father of one of the victimized children. He came up with what he said was a birth certificate to prove that his child was a real child and was really killed. Fetzer found 2 highly credentialed handwriting experts who had worked with the FBI. He showed them this document, and they both found that it was a forgery. The article I shared carried the news that the judge in the case refused to allow the jury to hear from either expert. I think that's newsworthy. I think that's significant. I don't want to think that this was a big fraud, right? But I also don't want to think that we make up our minds about something as important as that, just on the basis of assertions by the media or by the government, right? I think that case should be properly adjudicated.
Okay.
You know?
Okay. So so that it has been said, I don't have any basis to have an opinion on what you are saying. But I would think that coming from the US, having read a lot about Jefferson and the framers, it seems to me that Jefferson was of the opinion that we should be allowed to doubt anything, basically.
That's right.
So that has changed now in the American environment. You are not allowed anymore to, and perhaps you were never really allowed to cast the light of doubt on everything, or what? The situation is worse now, would you say, than it was before?
Yes, it's much worse, and it was bad before.
It was bad before, and it has rapidly changed for the worse?
Yes, it has.
In the past, how many years?
Well, especially the last 2 years.
Okay.
Well, what's happened, it's interesting you should ask that. The tone of the conspiracy theory attack has changed significantly since around 2010. Initially, as I made clear, the CIA cast conspiracy theory as something fundamentally ludicrous, that it was laughable. So that the appropriate response to a conspiracy theory would be ridicule, okay? Yeah. These poor people, they're a little crazy, they're touched in the head, etc. Since 2010, the use of the phrase has darkened. It has become less a laughing matter and more a matter of conspiracy theory literally posing an existential threat to national security, to public safety, that people who propound these theories are again not just a kind of a standing joke, but a mortal threat. Okay. So now we have the United States, the EU, and the UK all working together on what they're going to call a disinformation governance board. They're going to determine what's disinformation, what isn't. These authorities, right? The ones who have the most to lose from rigorous study rigorous objective study of the evidence, the ones whose truth claims we are obliged as the citizens of a democracy to examine, they're going to tell us what's disinformation and what isn't. As far as they're concerned, what's disinformation is anything that contradicts what they say.
Yeah.
And I have noticed that the so-called left in the US and the West generally now literally appears to define itself as those who never doubt the official narrative.
Yes.
The good ones, the righteous ones,
Yeah.
the enlightened ones, the
Yes.
ones who aren't Nazis. They're the ones who believe every word that Dr. Fauci says, believe every word that Joe Biden tries to say,
What's a curious fact, I believe it's a fact, that those who were the most ardent Nazis in the 30s in Germany were the educated classes.
That's right.
So they posed no questions. Generally speaking, they were the most convinced and never raised any doubts or objections. So it's curious that what we are looking at today, when we have the doctors, the journalists, the lawyers even, and all sorts of specialists towing the official government line.
That's exactly right.
Without question.
That's exactly right.
So I suppose they would even be prepared to call me a conspiracy theorist for not walking out of the room or attacking you personally when you start talking about something that is controversial, like let's say the 9/11 or Sandy Hook or whatever, that I should not tolerate that you have see things from another perspective.
No, you should not tolerate.
Okay.
No, that's absolutely true. What's stunning to me is, as a professor and a believer in kind of common sense and so on, is how confident one's critics feel about the narratives that they have never spent 10 seconds studying.
Yeah.
They don't look into any of this. They don't read about Sandy Hook. They don't read about the virus. They don't read about the so-called vaccines. They've never read anything about 9/11. They've never read anything about the Kennedy assassination. They evidently know not one thing about the CIA's long, ignoble history of toppling democratically elected governments, engaging in covert operations, the history of false flag attacks, which have been extremely common in the history of modern warfare. If you don't know any of those things, if you're completely innocent of that knowledge, right, then it's much easier for you to indulge yourself, tell yourself what you want to hear, which is to say, none of that's true. That's all crazy.
It goes back to human nature that we were discussing before. You say it's surprising how confident they are. But it is difficult to be an individual. We talk about the Reformation. The Enlightenment, and there's a great book called the Invention of the Individual by Larry Seatentop, I think his name is Larry Seatentop. But anyway, so that is the basis of our democratic societies, that each and every individual is a voting, responsible entity, right? But they seek shelter in the herd, in the mass.
Yes, they do.
The problem is that the masses do not think by themselves. Only you as an individual are able to think. So I guess propaganda would speak into this reality, this human reality of addressing people as herds, or what?
That's right.
Okay.
Yes, propaganda is, this is my informal, very simple definition. It's any organized attempt to get large numbers of people to think or do something, or not think or do something. That's really all it is. But it does deal with the collective. It does deal with the mass.
Yeah.
And the reason why, even though there has been propaganda deployed really for centuries by different governments and so on, we date its inception from World War I, because World War I was the first time that governments used not just the arts of propaganda, but all the mass media, right, in order to engineer, rabid assent to the conflict between those imperial powers, right? It requires a system in which everyone is reasonably literate and in which everyone is exposed to the stimulus that comes from all the media at once, you see. And all the media have to carry it. The propaganda narrative, in order to succeed, has to be omnipresent. It has to be inescapable. It has to be incessant, right? You cannot get away from it.
Okay.
Because propaganda doesn't want an argument. This is an important point. The people who have attacked me or people like me who attack you, they don't want any argument at all. Okay?
So they want silence then? They want
their narrative to be the only narrative available. In other words, they want it to be inconceivable that there's another side of the story, see? So it is really exactly like what the Inner Party does in 1984. You know, their aim is to get you to trust their say-so over the evidence of your own senses, see, which is a really radically totalitarian aim. And it's evident all around us, not just in China, you know. I mean, we can see here in Iceland, I've blanked on his name, but the guy who has a talk show on, he's on Facebook. Right? But
Yeah.
what's his name?
ⴍᴏᴜ.
ᴍᴏᴜ.
Yeah.
Are you talking? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, he posted, some friends have shown me,
Yeah.
he has posted some indignant comments on myself, claiming that I regard 9/11 as an illusion, which is an illusion. I never said that. And going through other mangled versions of various things I've discussed over the years, which he absorbed from Wikipedia or from other media attacks on me. In other words, being someone, I gather, who was extremely frightened of catching the virus, okay? I get that sense.
Yeah.
Deeply terrified by this specter, is therefore extremely angry at those who raise questions, fundamental questions about what's going on.
Okay.
When people are as frightened as that,
Yeah.
they want to believe that all the precautions they're taking under the guidance of the health authorities will keep them safe. They must believe that. So someone comes along and says, this whole thing is false. This whole thing is a tissue of misrepresentations, and it's completely unscientific, etc. The response then is to look for something that can be used to cast me as crazy.
Okay.
So then he lists these things that he is sort of imperfectly absorbed from the propaganda drive against myself, and spews them out on Facebook. Okay, and this is an important point because social media, I believe, has made an enormous difference in the effectiveness of propaganda. Okay, everybody carries a phone. Everybody's always online. Everybody's always on social media. On social media, you can basically vent all the propaganda you've already absorbed from the regular media. You can just repeat it. You can parrot it. You can make those claims again. You can attack the dissidents again, right? So there's a way in which social media enables a kind of kind of horizontal propaganda. Let me say that again. There's a way in which social media enables a new kind of horizontal propaganda, that people, soak up the propaganda from the news media. They usually soak it up on social media. They post approving comments. They then proceed to go their way and repeat the stuff that they've read and watched without ever stopping to think it might be false, without ever stopping to question it, right? And because social media is so easy to use, it's so much easier to post a comment than it is to write a letter, put it in an envelope and stamp it, and mail it and wait till it reaches its recipient. On social media, you post a comment. Usually you're angry, right? Because you've read something that pisses you off. So you post an angry comment. Maybe you throw in a couple of extra links to show that you're well-read, right? And then you fire it off. You fire it off in anger. So that just raises the temperature of the whole exchange. It lowers the intelligence of the whole exchange, right? So it's a double-edged sword, digital technology. It does enable people to reach one another, right, despite all the propaganda. It enables that. It enables us to find the other side of the story, although that's becoming increasingly difficult as you know, the various powers scrub the online universe of certain embarrassing data, you know, inconvenient information. So it has its uses, God knows. It's indispensable, but at the same time, it also adds immeasurably to the problem.
Now, this person I think you were referring to is a talk show host in Iceland, paid by the state media.
Yes.
So he's a journalist. He used to be quite an interesting journalist when he started. I remember when he came in 97, I remember him first. But now, I mean, looking at what he reads, he's sort of superficially judging you on what he finds obviously on Wikipedia or something like that. And you say you can easily refute everything that is stated there.
Yeah.
That's how I understand you.
Well, yes. I luckily don't need to, because there were a number of people reading his post who had been to my talk and heard me speak, you know, with their own ears, and were responding to him on the basis of that knowledge of what I had to say.
What you had actually said.
Yes, what I had actually said. Right.
Yes.
Right.
So let's say that, and I can understand that if we allow people to enjoy like the benefit of the doubt. Let's say that he and a number of millions of other people have basically been scared into submission.
Yes.
What troubles me more is the question of journalistic integrity. Where has that gone? Why don't journalists, which go around claiming they are from the free press, why do they not dig deeper? Why do they not sort of do their research, doubt the official line?
Yeah.
What could be the explanation for that?
Well,
Sorry, before you answer, this also would, of course, refer, sadly, to like the doctors, many scientists, most lawyers. So the professional classes.
Exactly. The professional classes are primarily to blame for this whole catastrophe. And don't forget to mention academics, okay? So academics, we think to ourselves, well, surely academics believe in a robust and honest exchange of views. Surely they believe in that. Surely they believe in consulting the evidence. Surely doctors are devoted to making people well. And surely journalists are interested in discovering the truth. Okay, those are all very idealistic takes on the missions of those different professions, okay? The answer, unfortunately, is that in each case, that kind of high-minded ideal of what the profession is supposed to do for all of us and for democracy, etc., is trumped by careerism, okay? In the real world, academics and doctors and lawyers, like journalists, have to go along to get along. It would be career suicide for certainly any journalist I know of to give a respectful hearing to those who, like me and like you, are making arguments that contradict the official narrative, right? Mm-hmm. If you're a journalist, especially a journalist at the New York Times or some outlet like that, or any state-supported outlet for that matter, if you venture away from the reservation and actually say, there's really something to this claim about 9/11 or about the so-called vaccines, there's something to it. There's something to the PCR tests being useless for diagnostic purposes. I could go on because there are so many lethal misconceptions floating around out there, right? You would think that the journalists would look for the truth and report it, but no, it's too risky for them, okay? They depend on their incomes as employees of these media outlets. Mm-hmm. They depend psychologically on the prestige that they garner from their jobs, You fancy yourself a part of the elite when you're working for the media. You know, you're not really, but you think you are. So it is simply too risky to tell the truth.
So careerism then trumps anything we would refer to as a civic duty, as that you have an obligation to the Republic, to the Constitution, to the general public,
Right.
to your profession.
Yes, to the truth.
To the truth.
Yes.
So all that is washed away because careerism in today's world is so much more important to them.
Absolutely. And here's an example from the world of science. Luc Montagnier, the great French, virologist who died recently and whose death was barely reported, interestingly enough. He was the one who discovered the relationship between HIV and AIDS. And that was a big deal. And I believe he got a Nobel for that, a Nobel Prize. But being the honest and devoted scientist that he is, he came to doubt that was actually accurate, right? Mm-hmm. So he gave it up. He dropped it.
The theory, you mean?
Yeah. He moved away from it because the science told him it was not really the whole truth, that there was something wrong with it. Now, that's something that Dr. Fauci would never do in a million years. That's something that your health authorities in Iceland would never do in a million. None of them will do it because they're fixated on their own power, their own wealth, their own connections with big pharma, their own authority, you see? Yeah. Montagnier is a real scientist. Peter Duesberg, who demolished the HIV/AIDS construct, was a real scientist, you see? The people we see on TV, gravely telling us what's true and what isn't, they're not scientists. They're bureaucrats. They're tyrants. They're tools of tyrants, So, everything is at stake here, right? In a world in which propaganda is not to be questioned, the survival of democracy is impossible. And I believe the survival of humanity is impossible too, because my own view, conspiracy theorist that I am, is that this entire crisis has been engineered to the advantage of extremely powerful players worldwide whose great reset will basically rob life of everything that makes it worth living. Mm-hmm. And I think that they see humanity itself as a kind of pollution, as a kind of plague, as a kind of virus. So that, it is just a serious business that we're engaged in here.
So it's a depressing picture that you paint, but just as we, try to wrap this up, and thank you for meeting me, what could be like a glimmer of hope? What could save us from this?
I'm glad you're asking me this because I resist the characterization that this is depressing. I don't think we should be depressed. Depression is just anger turned inward. Yeah. I think it's anger that we should be feeling, righteous anger, which will impel us to defend ourselves. And as dark as my vision may sound to people hearing me for the first time, I assure you that I think that this crisis will end and we will prevail. I'm convinced of this because the project that's being deployed against us all is so radical, it's so grandiose, it's so unnatural, it's so perverse, it's so wrong, okay? In a word, it's so evil. I don't think it's just incompetence or greed we're talking about here. We're talking about something that is deeply destructive and that would be permanently damaging to humankind and to the planet as well. And I, therefore, am absolutely sure that we will win, although we're going to go through more dark times over the next several years. The people who are deeply, deeply invested in this whole thing, and the institutions as well, they cannot possibly afford to let this go, okay? They have a tiger by the tail. They have to try to see this through, okay? And I don't think they can. And their failure will depend on our doggedly continuing to tell the truth, however unpopular or unpleasant it may be. We have to do that. We have to do what we're doing now. We have to talk to each other however we might, right? We have to urge people to go on a media fast and stop watching CNN and the others, you know, whatever the equivalents are here. Stop reading the major papers. They're toxic, you know, their lies are really every bit as mind-boggling as the lies that George Orwell made up in 1984 and the lies that the German propaganda machine pumped out on a regular basis. What comes out of the media throughout the so-called democratic West is every bit as false as those dystopian examples. This is something I never would have imagined myself saying because I used to be sort of allergic to people who compared American media narratives with Nazi narratives. I used to think that was tasteless, right? I don't anymore. If anything, it's an understatement because the German media under Goebbels, you know, they didn't have the fig leaf of the First Amendment, right? They weren't pretending to be telling the truth the way the Western media pretends to be telling us the truth against the lies of Donald Trump / Hitler, okay? So it's that pretense of democratic journalism that allows the Western media to be an even more effective means of deluding the masses than totalitarian media. Because under the Nazis or under the Bolsheviks, a lot of people kind of knew that they were being lied to. You know, a lot of people in China, young people, I have many Chinese students. They know that the Chinese media is all lies. They know that. So the more bluntly authoritarian the propaganda system, the less effective it is at swaying people. Whereas a media system that looks and sounds like the one in the West that invokes the First Amendment in its own defense and for its own betterment, right? Because you can't sue them because, you know, free speech, blah, blah, blah. You know, they derive a really insidious benefit from that pretense. This is why we have to keep pointing out to people everything you're reading and seeing is a lie. It was true of COVID. It will continue to be true of COVID. It's true of Ukraine and Russia. I can't believe what I'm seeing the media report as fact. Every single atrocity story told about the Russian military, and I've studied them carefully, every single one has turned out to be fake. They use images from other conflicts from other years. They change the captions. It's completely shameless, but the exact same thing happened during World War I. You know, the British and the Americans did exactly the same thing. They made up all these atrocities. 10 years after the war, a book came out by this guy, Arthur Ponsonby, who was a British member of parliament. It's called Falsehood in Wartime. I strongly recommend it. He just went through all the lurid, horrible, stomach-turning stories of German atrocities, and he explained meticulously how each one was made up, why it was made up, what its propaganda purpose was. This was an eye-opener for readers in Britain and the United States. 1928 it came out. The same year as Edward Bernays' classic Propaganda, in which that old hand at propaganda tried to get people to use the word propaganda once again, not as a pejorative term, but as a respectful, accurate technical term for the kind of work he did in which he believed, right? Both books came out in 1928. Falsehood in Wartime was a big seller. People ate it up. They read it. Bernays' book, Propaganda, didn't have much of a readership, but it's an important book to read now because it helps us understand how propaganda works through indirection. You know? Right.
So you mentioned this book, which was published in 1928.
Right.
Falsehood in Wartime.
Falsehood in Wartime.
And I believe that in this last chapter of Robert Kennedy Jr.'s book, The Real Anthony Fauci, is that?
Yes.
I believe it's there where it is stated they believe that it will take the public 10 years to sort of realize that they've been had, basically. But I don't think that we have 10 years to react. We would probably have to do that quite quickly.
Yes.
So,
Along those lines, I want to note, for people who feel kind of overwhelmed and hopeless,
yes.
When you're looking at the whole system, the whole horrible system, from from the ground, you're way down here on the surface of the planet going about your business, and you look up at this enormous structure. Every media outlet you can see, you can hear, they're all saying the same thing. They're all screaming at the top of their lungs. Everything they say is false and destructive and dangerous, right? Well, just before the Soviet Union collapsed, it felt exactly the same way to people there, right? Nobody expected that to fall apart as it did. Nobody expected it to fall apart as quickly as it did.
Mm-hmm.
It did suddenly all go to pieces. Yeah. And I think that as confident as they sound, and despite the fact that they are inescapable and they hog all the podiums and so on, and they're treated like gods by the media and all this stuff, they seem to be untouchable. I also think at the same time that their domain is based on something very weak and unsure. That's partly the financial system, which is heading for a reckoning. But it's also that the toll taken by these so-called vaccines on a daily basis is so destructive. The toll, let me rephrase that. It's also that the vaccination drive, so-called, the toll of that vaccination drive is becoming increasingly impossible to conceal.
Mm-hmm.
Despite the mantra that these shots are safe and effective, which we continue to hear from the governments and from media, they are lethal. They are killing people all over the world. People are literally dropping dead in the streets, in hotel rooms, in bus stations, on the beach, all over the world, even as we speak. Children are dropping dead with massive heart attacks. The media is struggling to make this horror look normal by coming up with a broad range of preposterous ways to explain it all away as anything but the vaccine, ABV, anything but the vaccine. They float these ridiculous pseudo-explanations that have a gloss of scientism to them. But the fact is that what's happening now is touching so many people. And touching so many people, many of whom will change their minds under the pressure of that trauma. Mm-hmm. Others won't. Others will lose loved ones and say, well, at least they got the shot. It could have been worse. I mean, that's just psychotic. A lot of people think that way. Mm-hmm. But there are others who are capable of recognizing that between what they've heard and what they're seeing with their own eyes, there is absolute division. There is a collision between these two things. And when that happens, you do tend to wake up, okay? Mm-hmm. Here's a historical analogy. Why did the Vietnam War end when it did? Why did it finally end when it did? People in my generation like to tell ourselves it's because of the peace protests, right, which I participated in. That was not why the war ended when it did. I mean, what the protesters did, as often as not, was just piss people off, right? Didn't like it. The reason why it ended was that the casualty rate was finally so high that it was impossible to talk the American people into continuing to believe that the war was going well. Mm-hmm. They could not do it. Mm-hmm. The toll was too great, okay? They could not hide that truth any longer, so they finally had to bite the bullet, so to speak, and just call it quits, right? Something like that is happening now, right? Only on a much, much bigger scale. And as that continues to happen, the timeline we're discussing will shorten.